So now let us move to the, so to say, old main line of Caro Kann defense. E4, c6, d4, d5, knight c3 or knight d2. I will explain you in a second the difference between those two moves. Nowadays, I think at least on the professional level, the e5 move probably is, you can say, that becoming the main line. But for many, many years, this system was the most popular for white, and there is a lot of theory. So what is the difference? I actually here, because you can start with knight c3 or knight d2. I was always starting with knight d2 myself, even though most of players, I think they play knight c3. The difference is that in any case, after both moves, it's difficult to find anything actually more or less logical otherwise, other than d takes e4. So maybe it's only g6 move. And I believe that with a knight on d2, I mean, g6 is less efficient, even though, of course, after knight c3, g6, white still has, well, fair chances to get an opening advantage. But this system is, I always thought it was playable for black. Because, for instance, if white is developing like this, knight f3, bishop g7, h3, just to be able to stop, after e5, maybe stopping bishop g4 once and for all. But maybe then knight f6, e5, knight e4 is not so clear. Let's say bishop d3, you can take and play c5, at least according to computer games, the statistics, it's pretty fine for black here. Or, of course, there are many possible moves for white, but let's say a5 looks very principal. But still bishop g7, let's say f4, logical move, yeah? Knight h6, knight f3, bishop g4, for instance, yeah? And then, let's say bishop e3, f6. Maybe it is objectively still in white's favor, but at least I always thought that this is definitely playable for black. That's why, just to avoid this additional option g6, I would start with knight d2, because here g6 is already not so good. I mean, I think white is just clearly better here, because knight gf3, bishop g7, and now simply bishop d3, even more precise than c3, which is also probably giving white a nice position. So here, if black takes on e4, then white would always be slightly better, very comfortable position. So black's plan here is to play knight h6, and then, let's say, bishop d3, castles, castle, followed by f6, knight f7, e5. A very original plan, but here with a knight on d2, I think that white has quite a nice option of playing rook e1, knight f7, and then c4. Actually, this is a way to put more pressure in the center and to stop black from playing e5. And I think it's pretty good for white. White is definitely slightly better, but even more precise is bishop d3, because now taking the pawn on d4 is at least dangerous. Even if white simply takes on d4 back, I think he will have more than enough compensation, but bishop c4 is even stronger. And otherwise, if black plays the same, tries to play the same setup, then, of course, already white is practically extra tempi. Yeah? Rook e1, and after f6, he can use this tempi, because e5 is not threatening yet, because the pawn on e5, after all those exchanges in the center, will be hanging. That's why white can play almost any move. I think h3 looks very logical. Knight f7, what else? And c4, and I think white is better here. So at least my recommendation would be to start with knight d2. But anyways, most of the time black takes on e4, knight takes e4. And now black has three options. Bishop f5 is definitely the main line. And actually, it for quite some time it considered to be probably the only line which really gives black good chances to equalize. But now there is this knight f6 line, which seems to be also very interesting and not so easy for white to get any advantage. But let's start with knight d7. This is a favorite Anatoly Karpov's line. He had played it a lot, including World Championship match against Garry Kasparov. Well, what can I say? It is definitely playable, but in any case, a little bit passive. If White plays in a very solid fashion. When White is trying to play very aggressively, I think that at least according to the modern state of theory, Black is experiencing some problems. Not that he is clearly worse, but for the moment, it seems that White has some initiative in all lines. So at this particular moment, probably knight d7 is having a certain crisis, but you never know, maybe it will have its reverse day at some point. So, well, let's say if White wants to play very solid, he can just play knight f3, very simple, solid move, knight f6, then just taking on f6, for instance. Now bishop c4 would be, would make sense, of course, because Black cannot play bishop g4 because of bishop takes f7 check, followed by knight e5 check. But after bishop f5, he's just in time to play e6 and probably having a very decent position. I think it's pretty equal here. That's why maybe if you like against knight d7, if you choose this system and you want to have a safe game, very solid with still some small pressure, I think c3 I would advise you to play. Because the point is that Black, as I've explained already in Caro Kann, he wants first to get his bishop out to f5 or g4 and only then to play e6. Because now if he plays e6, White can just continue with bishop d3 and is definitely slightly better, very, very comfortable position. So Black doesn't have such a big choice. Probably should play bishop f5 or bishop g4. Bishop f5 is a very usual, way of developing. But here, after knight e5, Black might have some issues to solve because queen b3 is threatening. So e6 is a logical move, and now g4. You see, it's very typical idea, and I would also like to draw your attention on the fact that that's why it's important to know different types of openings. Because, for instance, knowing something about Scandinavian defense, you can already understand that here the position is pretty similar, and then this g4 typical plan is very dangerous because, let's say, if bishop g6 or first bishop e4, f3, bishop g6, then still h4, and the threat h5 seems to be extremely annoying for Black. That's why after c3, Black's best is bishop g4. Now h3. And it seems that it's safer for Black just to take on f3, because if bishop h5, g4, bishop g6, knight e5, probably most likely it will lead to the same story, e6, h4. So Black usually takes on f3, queen takes f3, and let's say e6, bishop d2. This position, well, Karpov made, 100 draws here with Black out of 100 games. So he knows how to hold this position. It's difficult for White to win, but still, to me, it's not totally equal. After all, White has a bit of a space advantage and two bishops. So if you want, I don't think it's so dangerous for Black. So, and if you want to know how to play those positions, how to hold them, those positions, you should study games of Karpov. But anyways, it's a kind of safe, nice choice for White. So you get it almost by force on the knight d7 against knight d7 system, and it's not equal. Yeah, you can still try to press your opponent here. Then let's try to see what happens if White is trying to choose some more aggressive setups. Bishop c4. It's an interesting move. Was extremely popular sometime in the 80s, I think. Now Black is doing quite okay here, but still lots of room for investigation. You need to analyze it to be sure that Black is fine here, because the game is pretty direct. So knight f6, knight g5, e6, queen e2. Now all kind of knight takes f7. is threatening, so knight b6, bishop d3. That is a very important point, that black cannot really take on d4 here, because knight f3 comes and then knight e5, and black cannot really do anything with the f7 pawn. Therefore, usually black is trying to play h6, knight f3. And now c5 is the most logical move. And this position is probably, at least according to the old theory, it seems that black is doing okay, but with the new computers now and the new engines, so you need to check it carefully, because white has some ideas here. Also, for instance, if d takes c5, well, now very precise is to play knight bd7, because then black wants to take with a knight on c5. Otherwise, maybe white has some pressure. But here, before a5, there is some theory, quite sharp, but it seems that black is fine there. But what is interesting is knight e5, this kind of pawn sacrifice. Let's say c takes d4, knight f3. So white just sacrifices a pawn for initiative. Well, he believes that he'll probably get this pawn back one day on d4. And white's plan is to play bishop d2, long castle. Very interesting variation. Also, you can try to analyze it. It can be an interesting weapon for white. Then there is the main move is knight g5. Very strange move, of course, but by far the most popular nowadays. The thing is that, yeah, you can try to start with bishop d3, and let's say if knight gf6 to play knight g5 seems to be also an option. But I think why first knight g5? Usually that's what white is doing, because after bishop d3, black has knight df6 idea. Knight df6 is a strange move, but okay. Anyway, if he will exchange the knights on e4, then followed by knight f6, then it doesn't really matter which knight comes to f6 first. And the thing is that the d4 pawn is hanging, so white cannot really retreat somewhere to g3 or anywhere else, because black would just take the pawn. So then knight g5 is still possible. Again, a very typical idea, yeah, in many actually lines of Caro Kann with knight d2, d, knight e4, is that here, after queen takes d4, well, on top of everything, probably knight f3 is also quite dangerous, but the typical move is knight takes f7. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work, but this is a typical idea. So the idea is that now if king takes f7, bishop g6 check is possible. So that's why knight g5, but now the difference is that black has bishop g4. As I've mentioned already, it's very important, bishop h5, to get this bishop out, yeah, e6, and then black will develop, and it seems that is doing okay here. That's why knight g5 first is played, because now knight df6, well, probably doesn't make much sense already. Of course, white will never play bishop d3, probably he will go bishop c4 and be better. So that's why after knight g5, of course, also h6, yeah, that's quite obvious that white has knight e6 move here, and if queen a5 check, there is always bishop d2. So that's why after knight g5, e6 is possible, bishop d3, then white plays, let's say, bishop e7, knight f3, h6, knight e4. Looks strange, yeah, what white did, because he kind of lost two tempes. But first of all, h6 is not such a big tempe, and it can be even dangerous to have the pawn on h6 in some situations, if you white black castles short, and then white can get g4, g5. And secondly, what is important that you see that all what white's plan was to not to let the bishop on c8 out. Yeah, so black played e6. So white lost, well, at least one tempe, 1.5, but still this position is considered to be slightly better for white. Still, black is experiencing some problems here. That's why knight f6 is the main line. Now bishop d3. Well, you probably all know e6. Again, h6, knight e6 is coming. So e6, knight f3. Well, you all know this famous Deep Blue Kasparov game. When Gary played h6 at some point, I think here, and okay, then knight takes e6. This is the whole idea of this variation for white, that this knight takes e6 move is very strong, seemingly, because let's say if queen e7, white can just castle. So you cannot take with the queen because of rook e1, losing the queen. And if you take with a pawn, then bishop g6 check. And this position is extremely difficult for black, c4, for example, because it just that, he's piece up only for one pawn, but just cannot really get pieces together. I mean, it's totally stuck, and white develops his initiative very quickly, rook e1, bishop f4, so the position is very difficult. Or same goes for f e6, bishop g6, check, king e7, and now castle's also good, but black can at least maybe try to do this, even though looks quite dangerous. Or I think computers even prefer to start with bishop f4 to activate the bishop first, it seems that white is objectively better, first of all, and secondly, extremely difficult position to play with black, with his king in the center and lots of threats. So that is probably unacceptable for black, this line. And if you remember well, Gary lost very quickly against the machine playing this. That's why bishop d6 is the main move. And now queen e2, finally h6. Finally, here h6 is possible, no tactics for white, but then white plays knight e4 back. Takes on e4, queen takes e4. And so now this position was a subject of, big theoretical battles. Actually, back in the 90s, Karpov was playing a lot this position with black, actually with a quite success, but all in all, very, very difficult position to play, because the main line is queen c7, and then black has to play, like half of the game is a king in the center. So I'm not sure, first of all, if it's objectively sound for black, but also in a practical sense, I find it very difficult to play with black. Because, for instance, if knight f6, there is a queen h4 interesting move, but queen e2 is also quite dangerous. Queen c7, bishop d2, and you see this typical idea, long castle, and then it's very dangerous for black to castle short, because g4, g5 will come soon, and it can really be mate. Otherwise, black can try to play b6, bishop b7, trying to castle long, but then, according to theory, is also experiencing some problems. That's why, for some reason, queen c7 is considered to be a little bit more accurate, because probably on bishop d2, black has c5, and, keeping the knight on d7, the idea is that after dc, he can at least take with a knight on c5. But then white just castles, and it's actually becoming very difficult for black to, to vacate his king, because if knight f6, here already white will probably go to h4, and also difficult for black. Of course, short castle will lead to disaster. So black is playing usually b6, and now queen g4 and king f8. Quite as said, g5 was actually was for quite some time was popular, but I think that it's already refuted. If I remember correctly, there was a very important game, Anand Balagan from Dortmund 2003, I think, which was a refutation of g5, I think. And otherwise, king f8, this is the main line. Then it is quite strange, because black just plays bishop b7, slowly tries to push c5. Actually, king on f8 is not so bad. I mean, it looks like white should just be much better, but in fact, it's not easy to prove. But in any case, white has a lot of different options. For instance, quite logical is to play b3, bishop b7, bishop b2. So all what I can say about this position, that it's tricky. Karpov and Anand also played it sometimes back in the 90s. There is no direct refutation, but first of all, I think if white is very well prepared, he'll probably pose objective problems. And also it's, not to everyone's liking, to put it mildly, to play for quite some time with a king on f8. Yes, so therefore, all in all, knight d7 is now experiencing some problems. It's not refuted. I mean, it's a playable line, but you need to, if you want to play it with black, you need to find a way against all those main lines. And with white, you have a good choice. Yeah, for white players, you can play solid knight f3 and little pressure without risk, or you can try to choose systems, bishop c4, knight g5, where of course will require some theoretical knowledge, but black for the moment is experiencing some problems there. That's why, yes, knight d7 is now a bit out of fashion, but all of a sudden knight f6 move lately became very fashionable. I mean, it was considered to be really dubious for a very long time, because after knight takes f6 check, otherwise, of course, black is okay. Black will be definitely playing knight f6 and not starting to prepare it with knight d7 or bishop f5. So, of course, knight takes f6 check. And now, okay, gf6 is quite dubious. I mean, knight f3, again, it's maybe playable, but this pawn structure is pretty compromised, so which makes black sooner or later play for long castle. It's quite difficult to play short castle in this position. And then very often his king is getting under attack. White starts to push his pawns on the queen side. Actually, black doesn't have much play on the G line. It's a bit of an optical illusion that black can really create a lot of, counterplay on the G line, because white is probably going to castle short. So all in all, this line is very dubious. For instance, if bishop g4, white can even play in a very, very simple manner. I mean, there are many possible ways for white to play this position, but even the most primitive play is still quite dangerous for black. For example, something like that. Black sooner or later plays long castle. And now, for instance, knight h4. Very simple move. And let's say it's one of the many different interesting options. And even this position, g3, is quite unpleasant, because black cannot really push c5. Then white will always get d5. And otherwise, white starts to push his pawn. There is not so much counterplay on the other side of the board, so not to my liking this position for black. And normally, usually black tries to play bishop f5 here. And again, white has a big choice of options. I'm not even sure that after this very simple bishop d3 that black is fully equalizing. But most of the time, white is trying to play, let's say, starting with c3, e6 and g3. It makes a lot of sense to put bishop on g2, then you secure your king. Also, the bishop is working well on this diagonal. Very often then white, of course, will play knight h4 at some point. So the idea is that after knight h4, okay, let's say at some point on, let's just make a couple of logical moves. And knight h4, black usually plays bishop g6, and then castles. And it's difficult to understand how to proceed with black. Probably he should do long castle, and then white starts his a4, b4, starts his play, and it's pretty dangerous, especially with a bishop on g2. So all in all, gf is not to my taste, the move. But ef6, yes, well, that is quite strange. I mean, that this move is not, that after ef6, it's quite difficult for white to get an advantage, because it seems like in a more or less symmetrical position, white simply got a much better pawn structure. So that's why this move was not very popular for many, many years. Okay, from time to time, black would play it, but just for more of a, idea to surprise the opponent. But nowadays, there are a lot of computer games. The engines are assessing it pretty fine for black. I mean, they found lots of different ideas. And in general, there is a certain reassessment of this type of position. I don't know why, because by all logics and classical positional standards, it must be better for white, because he just has a pawn structure without any real, so to say, compensation from the black side. But it's very difficult to prove any advantage for white. So this variation is very interesting to play with black, even though I still have a feeling, frankly, that with time probably white will find some ways to be a bit, at least slightly better. I mean, to pose some problems for black. But for now, there is only one line which is posing problems for black. And even this line is not really clear at all. The point is that white can, of course, the most logical is to play knight f3, and by the way, that would lead to a position which in this variation, which we have studied earlier, knight f3, d5, knight c3, d4, knight takes e4, knight f6. Yeah, that was one of the most interesting weapons, for black against this knight f3, knight c3 system. And now, if you remember already, white is playing queen e2 usually nowadays, but knight takes f6, e takes f6, d4 he can also do, and then it would lead to transposition. So this position is anyway quite important for black, even if you decide not to play knight f6 here, but bishop f5, for example, knight d7, but still it's better to know this position with a knight on f3. But seems that after bishop d6, bishop d3, castles, actually black is doing quite okay. Bishop g4 is the most logical, just pinning the knight, but even playing some logical other moves, like rook e8, let's say h3, because this bishop g4 is permanently unpleasant move to face. So just to get the control on the g4 square. And now even knight d7 also, I think computers like this idea to put knight on c7, because bishop takes a6 shouldn't be too dangerous, of course, for black, because of course his pawn structure is really compromised, but he has two bishops, and especially the white square bishop, which controls lots of white squares, and he has very active position. Black is okay here. And let's say a3, knight c7, c4, maybe g6. Black just develops playing bishop e6, queen d7 sometimes, and sometimes a5, a4. So it's just a game. I mean, it's quite difficult for white to make really to make use of this extra pawn in the center. So at least according to the theory and to the engines, black is probably having normal game. I mean, comfortable, probably equal position. Equal complicated position. Or also possible to play knight d7. I kind of find it more human. Let's say you have to play knight d7 to put the knight on f8, maybe followed by knight g6 at some point. A normal position which seemingly looks like must be slightly better for white, but the practice cannot really prove this. So, but bishop g4 is also fine. Bishop g4, h3, bishop h5. So sooner or later, let's say rook e1, knight d7 or knight a6 again possible. And g4, bishop g6 is, it's a bit dubious for white, because then his king is a bit getting vulnerable. Well, let's say c4, rook e8. I've looked at the games here, computer games, human games. The statistics is more or less 50%. So I guess it's not a problem for this position for black. Therefore, c3 is more dangerous. I think it's a more dangerous move. So white wants to put the knight on e2, and that makes sense, because with the pawn on f6, actually knight on f3 is pretty limited, because the e5, g5 squares are under control with the f6 pawn. So it makes sense to put the knight on e2. And here the main line goes bishop d6, bishop d3, castles. Let's say queen c2 first, or knight e2, rook e8. Anyways, queen c2 here is the best move. So let's say queen c2, rook e8 check, logical, knight e2. Okay, this is the tabia. This is the position which was always considered to be a problem for black, because what to do with the h7 pawn? If black plays g6, that is very logical, then trying to get f5, maybe knight d7, f6, e4 at some point then, and this is a big difference. This is a point why white hasn't castled yet, because now he has h4 move, and h5 is a serious threat, so black has a big issue with his king, even though, by the way, strangely enough, bishop e6, h5, f5 is not so clear. It's not so easy for white to mate, but I wouldn't recommend you to play it. I mean, it's such experiments, because the king is weak and white has potentially very dangerous attack. But computers, by the way, are managing to have a decent statistics here with black, but I think still it's in white's favor. Then another move is h6, for instance, and here white also can develop initiative playing like this knight g3. That is quite important move, because this f5 square. Otherwise, if pawn would have been on h7, then black would just play g6 and have no problem with a knight on g3. But here g6 is not possible, and then this knight can get land to f5, and it's very difficult to get rid of this knight. Yeah, and also exchanging it for the bishop is probably not satisfactory for black. So here white has quite a good potential. Let's say queen c7, c4, not necessary, but actually an interesting concept here to play. For instance, c4, knight f8, f4. You see, it's very important that the knight is on g3 and not on f3, because it can go to e4, f5. All in all, white can simply try to continue his development. I think that here things are, it is again still playable, but here it's very prosperous for white. That's why, but then not such a long time ago, black players started to play h5 here. They discovered this very strange move. And this is now the main position of the variation knight f6. Lots of games, lots of discussions here. White is trying and keep on trying here to get some advantage, but it's not easy. You see, the very important that if white castles, then of course already, this knight g3, there is always h4, yeah, coming. So then the pawn is much better on h5. So castle is considered to be not so clear. So after h5, what white tries to do now most often is playing something like this: bishop e3, trying to play long castle and to make use of the pawn on h5. You know that the king is slightly weakened, but situation is not clear at all here. So black has his counterplay, for instance, knight a6, and after long castle, black can get bishop e6, queen a5. So quite some play. There was a game, I think very interesting game, Caro Kann, maybe a year or two ago. You can have a look at it. Many other games of strong players. So all in all, an interesting variation. The last word hadn't been said yet. So there are still discussions here. Still, white is trying all the time some new setups, new ideas to pose problems for black. But for this moment of time, it's considered to be, quite fine for black, and actually easy play, quite easy, comfortable play. So this variation is very interesting for black. If you are playing Caro Kann with black, I think it can be in your repertoire, even if it's not the main weapon, and you decide to play bishop f5 as a main weapon. Still, this variation is perfectly playable. As to the white players, I think it's probably, I would definitely advise you to put the knight on e2, and here to try to find ideas in this position, with the knight on e2, queen on c2, h5. I have a feeling that there must be, it cannot be so easy, and probably white still can invent some new ideas, and which can be quite dangerous for black, but you need to work here. It's in this variation you need to invent some ideas, because as I mentioned already, the current state of theory is pretty much in black's favor. But again, there is a potential. I believe that it cannot be so simple in chess, just doubling your pawns, having a worse pawn structure. Okay, active play, sort of easy development, but still, pawn structure is an important strategical factor in every position. So I believe white can do better than what they were doing up to this moment. So there are chances for an advantage. So then we come to the main line, knight takes e4, bishop f5. So knight takes e4, bishop f5, it is by far the most popular move in this position. White's best move is knight g3, and it's very logical. If you have to retreat with a knight, at least to attack the bishop. Bishop g6. So black is doing everything according to his plan. He wants to play e6, knight f6, knight d7, develop the bishop, and will be doing very well. So white's most interesting way of fighting for advantage is to try to do something quick, like h4. It's an aggressive move. Well, there are other ways of playing, but let's say knight h3, e6, knight f4. You know already this idea, so it's usually you have the knight on e5, but here is knight on f4. Anyways, white wants to play h4, h5, and to bother this bishop on g6. For instance, after knight d6, h4, black might have some trouble, yeah, because h5 is very unpleasant threat. And he cannot play h6 because of knight takes g6. But bishop d6 seems to be doing well. Here, black is in time. h4, queen c7, attacking the knight on f4. And after, maybe queen f3 makes sense. I mean, it's a pawn sacrifice. For instance, black can take on c2, and maybe white can develop some initiative here. But at least, in Caro Kann, it's not easy to get a very dangerous attack, because in general black's position is extremely solid, no weaknesses, so it's very risky way of playing with white. But otherwise, after knight takes g6, h takes g6, knight e4, it's not much. Yeah, for white, because he lost lots of tempis following this bishop on g6, and exchanging it for his knight. So here, actually, bishop f4 is perfectly fine for black, but even strangely enough, knight f6 is maybe even simpler. Knight takes d6, queen takes d6. Of course, in general, white, it's quite nice for white to have advantage of two bishops, but here, white just lost too much time, and black is simply, quickly developing some initiative, like bishop e2, knight d7, g3, e5, opening up the position, and actually knights are pretty mobile here in this position, and black is having a good game according to the theory. So knight h3 also you can do it via knight e2, but doesn't change much, followed by knight f4. It's the same, just leads to transposition. Then, of course, there is a very solid way of playing for white. It's just knight f3, let's say e6 or knight d7, and then bishop d3. Yeah, that's a classical way of playing. Very safe for white, very solid, logical. But, black manages to finish his development. Yeah, usually white is playing rook e1, then c4, and maybe later b3, bishop b2, but this type of position, this Caro Kann structure, is extremely solid for black. Very difficult for white to, to get some real advantage. So black can try to take on d3 is one option. If black is afraid of bishop takes g6, it's also possible to take, and let's say queen c7, maybe stopping bishop f4, followed by castle, or also castle is possible, because it's not clear if bishop g6, hg6 is really so dangerous for black. I mean, there is only one little problem, potential problem, that if white lands his knight at some point on g5, he might have quite a dangerous initiative and certain potential, mating threats on h line, but it's not going to happen in this position. So bishop f4, and now black has a big choice of possible moves. Very typical idea here sometimes to get b5. That's one of the typical ideas. Another typical idea is to push the a pawn, a5, a4, also possible. Or let's say another way of playing is rook e8, and let's after queen c2 to try to push c5. So all in all, it's a comfortable line for white in the sense that you don't need to study anything, you don't need to learn any theory really, and it's a slightly nominally more comfortable game for white, but of course it's not causing any real danger, to black also. So h4 is considered to be the best move here. h6. And now, again, knight h3 is another way of playing it. Normally, white is playing knight f3. So knight h3, e6, knight f4, bishop h7, bishop c4. This is the system. So white tries to get some very direct threats. Maybe it's sometimes trying to sacrifice on e6, but it doesn't really work. So there are no lines where taking on e6 cause black any real danger if black knows how exactly to develop his pieces. So for instance, there is a move queen e2. Actually, it seems that queen takes d4 is working here. It's perfectly playable, but you can also start with bishop d6 as well. And otherwise, c3, bishop d6. Not clear what white had achieved with this knight on f4. So quite often he's trying to play knight h5, castles, and let's say takes on f6, queen e2, knight d7. Well, white lost quite many tempes, and I don't see any great achievements. So I don't think this line is really dangerous. Therefore, knight f3. Well, white was also trying to play f4 just to put the pawn on f4. Then knight f3, and to have some more control on the center, something like that. h5, bishop d3, but then black also having this quite important tempi, and very often he manages c5 quickly and is also doing fine. So knight f3 is the main move, and now black has a choice. Knight d7 is safer in some way, but e6 is an interesting move order. The idea is that if white is playing in the same manner as in the main line, which I'm going to show you later, then maybe black has some very interesting additional options actually to play without knight bd7. So to try to get c5 quickly, like for instance bishop d2, and then maybe c5 is already working, followed by knight c6. So let's say knight e4, you can exchange and on e4 and play knight c6, and probably black is equalizing here. But after e6, knight e5 is a very serious move. Bishop h7, bishop d3. Again, this typical idea which I have mentioned already. After queen takes d4, there is knight takes f7. So this doesn't work so well. Bishop takes d3, knight takes h8, and even if knight is seemingly in danger, but white is better here. Is just in time to save his knight, and finally he's an exchange up. So after bishop d3, it's better to take on d3, queen d3, and knight d7. And now bishop f4 is an interesting move, has to be checked, but usually white would go play f4 here, and for quite a long time it considered to be dangerous for black. Black was experiencing problems here. But lately, I think the theory goes like this: bishop e7, and lately white is having difficulties finding an advantage in this line after bishop e7. It's very direct, So, of course, if white manages to develop bishop e3, long castle, then he can have a very dangerous initiative. But again, here play is very direct. For instance, if knight h5, then knight f6 is possible. Okay, you need to know some lines here, of course. For instance, knight takes g7, check, king f8, and now this line seems to be quite important. Knight takes h8, and now queen a5 check is very, very important. Otherwise, maybe white would be better, but this maneuver is very strong. Queen is getting to f5, and let's say rook h3, rook takes h8, and it's very important to activate the queen, and black is doing fine here, at least not worse. And for instance, another line is bishop d2. And now black probably, if he wants to equalize, has to go all in, take this pawn. Looks extremely dangerous, but computers are, very useful here to establish the fact, that in this position, which is pretty forced, it seems that black is just in time to equalize move per move. For instance, queen h5, queen g4, and everything works just by tempi. Seems that black is equalizing. So e6 is a very playable, very interesting move order. You have to, of course, study it carefully because it's getting very tricky and very direct in many lines. Knight d7 is a safer choice, so to say. So now white's concept is why he played h4. He wants to put the pawn on h5, exchange this bishop, and of course already trying to play for long castle. Actually, this pawn on h5 is very important strategically, because in many Endgames, for example, yeah, if white would just have pawn on h2 and black has pawn on h7, it would be just totally equal. But here, this g7 pawn, white somehow manages to get some pressure on the king side, and sometimes black is experiencing some problems, pure positional problems, because of this fixation, on the king side. This g7 h6 pawn are fixed with a pawn on h5. And also, of course, it can help white develop some attack against the king if black castles short. So e6 now is played. And now bishop d2, bishop f4, two main moves here. Bishop f4 was the main line by far for quite some time, because, for instance, in those variations after knight f6, long castle, bishop e7, in this system, which we will check later on. Here, bishop on f4 is much more active, so white has more chances to get opening advantage. Let's say king b1, for instance, castle knight e4, and we will analyze this position with the bishop on d2, but bishop on f4 makes quite some difference, much more active, and here, according to theory, black is experiencing problems. So, but after bishop f4, queen a5 check, that is quite an important move to know. The idea is that if now white is playing c3, then after knight f6, he cannot really play long castle because the pawn on a2 is hanging. So white is playing a4. So then white has to change his plans just to play more like positionally. Yeah, a4 before, gain some space on this flank, and then followed by a short castle. But again, in this variation, once white is castling short most of the time, I mean, it's not that dangerous for black. So black can even play queen d5. Actually, he's not losing his queen, because if c4, he has bishop takes b4 check, and otherwise, after some move like rook b1, black can play b5, so even this is playable. But queen d8 is at minimum, you can just play queen d8, and I think it's pretty okay for black. That's why after queen a5 check, bishop d2 is a main line, and now bishop b4. Strange, of course, play, but seems to be for quite many years already, white cannot really find an advantage here, even though, of course, it's still playable. So knight e4 is a very important move, direct move, but then you can take on d2, and knight f6, also very important. Otherwise, I think white is better. But here, knight d6 check, king e7. Again, knight takes b7, queen b4. There were many games already on this position. Queen, after, for instance, queen b3, black takes on d4, looks dangerous, tricky, but I think it's already sterilized in the sense that, white cannot really achieve anything here. So it's equal. So white's main try is c3, and then bishop e7. c4. Now already back bishop b4, knight e4 is probably dubious, because, white has a very important extra tempi c4. But here already queen c7. Well, of course, in this variation, it is solid for black, and it's seemingly positional, but actually you need to know lots of direct lines, direct variations, because, for instance, it's here all this queen a5, bishop b4, bishop e7 maneuvers you need to know exactly, otherwise you can get under some serious pressure. But here it seems that black is able to get a decent position. I don't know if equalize is maybe too strong word, because the position is just complicated and playable, but the most dangerous attempt was d5, was considered to be d5, but then cd5, and then the queen d6 move was found, and it seems that it's a very clear way to equalize, an important move to know. And otherwise, if white is playing long castle, then knight f6, and in some ways this c4 move, in some positions, it's in general it's useful, but also it kind of weakens a bit his king, so it gives black those ideas, sometimes playing b5. So this position is quite unclear, very complicated. For instance, king b1, castles, rook e1. But then normally in this type of position, when black castles short, white must try to play for direct attack. If just playing in the center is not usually is not so dangerous. So now black can actually try to play b5 directly, which looks quite interesting, but also simply a5, pushing the a pawn. There was a lot of practice in this particular position, also in general in this type of positions. And I would say the general conclusion is, as I see it, that if white doesn't manage to get some very direct play, direct threats on the black's king, then usually black has enough counterplay here. Or white can also try to start with knight e4. Maybe black can try to play rook d8 first, not to hurry castling because some g4 might come. And let's say take an f6, queen e2, maybe b5 even. I don't know, very complicated position. White might probably will play c5 in this type of position. And of course, giving up the d5 square, but then trying to fight against this, to play, for the black king. So to wait when black will castle, which is most likely will happen one day, and then to try g4, g5. But it's pretty double-edged game. So bishop f4, queen a5 check. For now, it's doing pretty well, according to theory. So that's why bishop d2 is more popular now. Knight f6, long castle. So here black has two different options, very different in nature. So one is queen c7. This is the old main line. In the 80s or 70s, that was practically the only option for black. That was the way black would play. So trying to play long castle. And actually, it is solid, and there is no refutation of this line. But let's say if king b1, black maybe has already c5. So white would try to play g3 just because it's bishop f4 is quite an annoying threat. So black would take on e4 and bishop d6. So this is the main tabby of this variation. I actually played it even in my World Championship match against Peter Leko in 2004 in Brissago, one of the games. It is solid for black, but probably, there are many different ways for white to play. And in general, white, if he knows what he is doing, probably he can still keep certain advantage because, again, mainly because of this h5 pawn and this g7 weakness. Doesn't seem to be a weakness yet, but one day black will probably play c5 or e5. Then bishop might get to this diagonal to c3, and this g7 pawn have to be very careful with it, playing black. So now, for instance, one of the main lines is going like this. If white wants to play very direct, then he's playing c4. Black usually answers with c5 and then d5, a very direct line, and knight f6, queen c2, ed5, cd5. You cannot take the pawn on d5 because queen f5 checks. So rook h8, bishop c3. Strategically dangerous position for black because, if I just end up with my knight on f5, of course, white will be better. But somehow, just by tempest, queen d7, there were many, many games, lots of theoretical discussions here. It seems that this position takes knight h4. It's strategically time almost to resign for black, but everything is, chess is becoming nowadays very direct. So rook e5, f4, rook takes h5, and series still goes on. And it seems that black can hold here. That's why then later, I think instead of c4, white would start to try to play more positionally. Not to hurry immediately, forcing matters. So to play king b1, rook h8, and now maybe queen e2 is an interesting way of playing. So the idea is that if black plays c5 in this type of position, very often what is quite dangerous is, let's say, d takes c5 immediately or move later, and then rook h4. It's quite a dangerous idea because rook gets to c4 and or even to d4. It's a nice way to maneuver the rook to an active position, and here black can experience some problems. But maybe after queen e2, e5 is possible, and here, for instance, this is a possible line: rook e1, e4, knight h4. Hard to say if white really has anything special in this position. For knight f6, knight f5, bishop f8. And so there is some strategical danger because of this pawn structure on the king side. But maybe at the end of the day, if Black analyzes this position well, probably there is a good chance that he will equalize. But all in all, it's a bit passive. So nowadays, bishop e7 is much more popular, because you see, once the computer engines enter chess, such lines are much easier to play with Black, because you can understand that in the pre-computer era, castling short, it's very difficult to commit yourself to it, because it's quite clear that White very often is playing knight e4 and then starts g4, g5, and it's very easy to get mated. So, of course, that's why very few people were playing this system in the 80s. So they started to play in the 90s when computers started to be more and more powerful. And now it seems that bishop e7 is a main line, the most principal move. Of course, if you want to play this variation, you really need to know move per move, lots of lines, because now White's best chance is to start some direct attack against the king, and you really... if you want not to get mated, you just have to analyze it carefully and to know exactly how do you parry all those dangerous attempts of White. From other point of view, if it works, if you don't get mated after all those direct moves like knight e4, g4, then positionally Black is fine, because he wants to castle, and then very quickly he pushes c5, gets his counterplay in the center, and what is a major difference compared to those lines when Black is playing long castle, that the g7 pawn is well protected so the king is on g8. So strategically, Black is doing well in this position. It's just that he needs to be careful not to get mated quickly. So let's say knight e4. Probably, actually, I would advise you, if you want to play it with White, maybe to start with king b1, just not to allow additional options. If you want to play king b1 after knight e4, for instance, castles knight e4. Just to avoid additional option, which I'm going to show you right now. Otherwise, White can just play queen e2, logical move, trying to play slowly, but it seems that Black has enough counterplay here. Even though it has to be accurate, of course, always, because those attacks can always come. For instance, another ideas for White is to play next knight e5 or knight f1, g4. So lots of dangerous ideas, but somehow there were many games, and it seems that Black is always just in time to create his own play or to parry those threats. So queen b6, according to theory, is perfectly fine, but also you can even start to push this a pawn. Let's say knight e5, a4, and somehow Black very often also at some point start to create his own threats against White's king. So, but probably if you play king b1 castle, then maybe knight e4 is already the best move. Or let's say knight e4 immediately. This just gives Black an additional option to take on e4, play knight f6, queen e2, and queen d5, followed by queen e4 to change queens. It is... it's a little bit boring, so to say. So Black is just trying to play for equality, but maybe it's enough to equalize also, actually, because after c4, now queen e4, and it seems that, if bishop e3, then simply b5 is working well. Rook h4, queen h7. Doesn't look good, but it seems to work. At least according to the theory, Black is doing fine here. Knight e5, rook c8, and he's getting enough counterplay. This queen on h7 is a very strange place for this queen, so it can be out of play one day, but actually it's a bit tricky to have queen on h7. But at this particular moment, it's actually quite active here, controlling the diagonal. So after queen e4, White can just try to take on e4, or let's say like this, rook e1. Now already Black rather exchanges queens, and then playing b5, just in time to create counterplay. So queen takes e4 is the usual way of playing. Now bishop e1, but more often is bishop e3 is played. And this type of endgame is not so easy for black. I mean, if he is just playing it slowly, then white has, because of this h5 pawn, white has certain space advantage and is pressing. I mean, I remember myself, I lost a rapid game. I mean, this something similar. I mean, this type of endgame against Alexei Shirov in 2002, I think, in Moscow Rapid. You can check this game. He played it extremely well, and I started to realize at some point over the board that it's seemingly equal endgame is not so equal, and finally lost it. And then I actually managed to win a nice and quite instructive game against Evgeny Bareev in Vaikanzea, if I remember well, maybe 2004 was it. So you can also check this game. So this endgame in general is not as simple as it looks, because it looks just pretty equal, but in fact not. You have to be very careful with black playing this endgame. Maybe in this particular version, black has this very direct way of playing knight d6, b3, b5, just immediately, quickly to start attacking the c4 pawn, and might be in time to equalize. But anyway, most of the time black just plays castle here, just castles. And here it's this position you really need to know, you really need to work on it and to analyze move per move, because there are many options. Mostly, I think white also sometimes tries to play g4 in this position. So very direct play, but most of the time is knight takes f6, knight takes f6. Now, let's say king b1. If knight e5, then c5. Here again, if you just give one tempi to white, like king b1, g4, very often it's just very, very dangerous and direct attack. But black is always just in time by tempi. For instance, in this variation, knight e5, c5, dc5, queen c7, important move. f4, bishop takes c5, and g4 looks dangerous, but let's say rook a c8 and then rook fd8, always in time. Yeah, I mean, with his counterplay, and sometimes even actually overtaking the initiative, because black also has his threats, on the c line and d line. Another very, very important theoretical line is g4 here. So black, I think, is practically forced to take rook g1, and now taking on f2. I think it's finally a theoretical forced draw. According to theory, queen e2, knight d1, and bishop takes h6, bishop f6, and finally you need to learn this line, but it seems that it's already established a forced draw. That's why king b1 is the main move. Now c5, you really need to hurry now, because queen d5, for instance, knight d5, it's a very important tempi, and here black is in trouble. So c5. And g4. Well, otherwise, if white is playing slowly like bishop c1, I guess cd4, also queen c7 is good. I think this is no problem, but g4 is a very principal move here, and this position you need to analyze. I think at the, finally, black is holding here move per move, so it's very direct play. So if it's a draw, it's a draw. I mean, not much white can invent here, but if you don't know it, it's very easy to lose with black very quickly. For instance, knight takes g4, and I think the main move here is queen e2, and you need a powerful engine here. But I think that it's holding. I mean, there is no way for white to be better. In general, in this line with bishop e7, white has tried practically everything, every single logical move already here, but again, you need to know it. If you play in black, you need to know it well, you need to memorize it well, to remember each move order, all of those long sharp lines. Otherwise, you can get into just lose a game without a fight if you forget something, or just miss some move in your analysis, because it's very sharp, this position. But again, if you with black, you can always play queen c7, long castle, and play this solid line, but that might be slightly worse. Bishop e7 is very principled, very direct, very sound positionally, but again, if it works and if you're not getting mated, then it's quite a problem for white here, what to do against this line. So all in all, what I can say about this this position after knight takes e4, my opinion is that knight d7 is probably, yeah, it's not very prosperous line to play, gives white too many options, and not sure if it equalizes objectively. Knight f6 is this taken then with the e pawn is a very interesting variation, which is at this moment of time doing well. But again, my feeling is that probably due to the better pawn structure, white has some chances to fight for advantage here. But the theory is developing all the time in this variation. It's very fashionable nowadays, so many things are still to discover. And bishop f5, a lot of theory, of course, here, a lot of options white has. But for now, it seems that the only real try for advantage is this h4, knight f3, and all those main lines. And here you have a choice of playing with long castle. First of all, very interesting choice of playing e6, this move order, which can be very tricky and might also equalize. Or otherwise, this main line, here you have a choice of castling short or long. Yeah, and short castle is dangerous, risky, but at this moment of time, it seems that white cannot find keys. White cannot really find any advantage here. So all in all, yeah, this black is doing in general pretty well in this line. And then we are moving now to the e5 variation, which is becoming more and more popular among top players, and it is quite a serious challenge, obviously, for black.